Welcome to Off the Shelf, Conversations with Authors. I'm Martha Kofod, and our guest today is Richard Spears. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. You are an author, you're a linguist, and your authorship deals with linguistics for the most part. Tell us a little bit about how you got started with that, what your background is.
Okay. Most of my book, well, almost all of my books are dictionaries. They fit into linguistics in a particular way, and I'll talk about that when I got to the end of this. I suppose I was, like so many people, always interested in words and the strange way they seem to work. Even as a child, I was perplexed by words that seemed to mean something that they didn't, or idioms like kick the bucket, where it doesn't mean what it says, but you have to know the meaning of the phrase. And I recognized this and toyed with it for a long time. I collected dictionaries as a child and as a teenager. I had quite a large collection of very old dictionaries of all the languages of the world. I have no idea what I thought I was going to do with them. I saved them for a long time and finally sold them for a lot of money. Probably was a good thing. But basically my interest in linguistics didn't develop until there was a product of linguistics in the universities that you could study. People, of course, have been studying language for ages and ages, but to have a field that could lead to a major with a curriculum where there was a basic set of knowledge elements that everybody had to know, that was something that didn't come along until the mid-50s when I was in college. I was able to take one or two English linguistic courses in college, and it really didn't interest me to go on at that point with it as a field, except that when I started graduate school, that was the only thing that was there that really did interest me. I started out at Indiana University with a fellowship in Finnish and learned a lot about an incredibly interesting language that is alleged to have 15 different cases. If you think Latin would cause you trouble, Finnish is loaded with this kind of thing. And while I was looking for a dissertation topic at Indiana University, I found I found 3 Africans at Indiana University taking courses in English as a second language, which I was teaching in my second and third year, and decided this would make a wonderful dissertation topic, this language that they speak, since no one else in English had described the language or worked with it.
And so what was that language?
The language is called Maninka, and it's a language group called Maninka Bambara Jula, spoken in Guinea, Mali, and various other places in West Africa. It's not something that's readily available to Americans. I mean, you don't find these speakers everywhere, and if you go to a country like that, you'll probably be speaking French and conversing with these people through a translator. There was something called the National Defense Education Act at the time, which encouraged the learning and development of expertise in these languages in some way related to national defense. I have no idea. It was Congress's idea. And
so those were more like native languages then?
Well, I'm not sure what they. I'm not sure what that is. I mean, I'll give you a little difficulty. Give you a little difficulty. They're not dialects. They are the basic languages of the people. Okay. So they are real whole languages. They're not usually written down, except for special. Well, they are now, but they don't have a long history of literacy. While I was at Indiana working on my dissertation, in the summers, I worked on a Peace Corps training project, which means, at that time at any rate, and we're talking about the early 60s now, people who'd volunteered and were accepted for Peace Corps training came to Indiana University to be trained in all sorts of things that have to do with Sierra Leone, which is a country in West Africa where they were headed. I was involved in the language training part of it, since I'd had experience with African languages. And to the government, the indigenous language of Guinea is close enough to the language of Sierra Leone next door that seemed to be good experience. At any rate, one of the consultants on the project was a Professor Jack Berry, who was brought from first England and then one of the universities in Michigan, was brought to Northwestern to start an African languages program in the African Studies Center at Northwestern. When he was assembling faculty for this program, he remembered me. We worked very well together. He was impressed with my talents and abilities in this area, and I'm not trying to boast, but one follows one's talents and abilities to where you get to in life, and that was one that worked for me, and basically it landed me an assistant professorship at Northwestern in the newly formed linguistics departments. It was one of the first linguistics departments in the country, to show you how new it is. At Indiana University, where I got my PhD, it had been a program in linguistics, which is different from a department. It was made into a department of linguistics just before I got my degree, which meant I was the first graduate with a PhD from the Department of Linguistics at Indiana, the best I can figure out.
Well, that was fortunate.
Well, I guess it doesn't. There were many other people who had PhDs in linguistics, but they weren't from the department. So it's wonderful for propaganda. At Northwestern, I continued working in African languages and did the Mendi, a contract with the federal government to do a Mendi, that's another West African language of Sierra Leone, a teaching manual, and then also a Maninka teaching manuals, because I had worked on that quite extensively. And little by little kept going back into the Sierra Leone Creole, this Creole language, which is an English-based language with lots of African components that I'd worked with in the Peace Corps. And this, just trying to compress a lot of history into a small amount of time, led me into trying to deal with extreme dialects in English. What are all of these odd variants of English that we give funny names to? What makes them different? Why are they unique? Why are they worth studying? And so I began to move into other areas like idioms, where it's a string of words or a compound that cannot be interpreted literally. I think I mentioned kick the bucket. It has a meaning of to die, but if you take it literally, it means something entirely different. As it turns out, much of the language that we speak, much of the language that people who speak literate languages use, has thousands of these things in it. And somehow we know when to interpret a string of words as an idiom, and when to interpret that same string of words as something literal.
How did you research this? What were your sources?
Well, the things that I'm talking about right now are when you sit down and turn out the light and think, when you're trying to make sense of what goes on around you in the world. When it comes down to actually putting something together, then you need sources. But like all good young kids, I needed a theory, and my theory was basically, and it's something that I still haven't settled, thank heavens I've left something for somebody else to figure out, but we spend all of our time wondering about variation in language, deviation from some sort of a norm. We talk about language change, as we say language is always changing all around us all the time, but nobody ever talks about what keeps the rest of the language stable. And I became interested in this really strange non-field of language stability. It's as we sort of pretend that it's the natural state for language to be the same in Maine and California and Texas, that English is the same and will remain the same, even though people don't talk to one another very much between those areas. What are the elements that cause stability? What are the social reasons for keeping those elements going? I mean, the answers to this are obviously, we use schooling, we use reference works such as dictionaries to let us know the way things were, the way people have used language in the past. And there's sort of a commitment that we try to teach in school that we're going to use them the same way so that we can communicate with ourselves, so that we can communicate with people at long distances so that their language doesn't change while ours stays the same, or ours changes while theirs stays the same. And we want to be able to read history. We don't want language to change so fast that we can't read about the past, and we don't want it to change so fast that we know that the people in the future won't be able to understand what's going on.
So the standards are stable then, and Webster's Dictionary remains the model for the language?
No, and here's where we get into trouble, because I know what you're getting at, and I'll try to answer what you're getting at without confirming what you say. Basically, what I'm saying is we have documentation for the language, and it's dictionaries, not just Webster's Dictionary, which would be Merriam-Webster. That's the original Webster. Merriam-Webster Dictionary, the unabridged, is the Supreme Court's dictionary. It's the arbiter of meaning in words, but that doesn't mean that stability radiates from the documentation. The documentation records the stability. So in order for a word to get an entry in any major dictionary, one has to do massive research on the word to see how it's being used now. Google is used a lot for that kind of thing. All sorts of, since so many books now are coming out available in machine readable form, you can actually do lexicographical research on computer files of books, going well back into the past to see what is the core element, what is changing, but what's staying the same, and that's the important thing.
So does slang, how difficult is it for slang words to get into the published dictionaries? There's still resistance to that.
Not for a large dictionary like the Oxford English Dictionary or for any of the major dictionaries in the US. I think the thing about slang is that for entrance into a dictionary, it's no different from any other word. Robert Birchfield, who was an editor of the OED for many years, said for a word to get into the dictionary, it must be widespread and long-lasting. And basically, slang that meets those criteria will get into a dictionary and remain there for a very long time.
Long-lasting, could you venture any year?
Is booze a slang word?
I don't know.
It is. And
Is it?
It's been around for, it's not the word of choice or the polite word you would use from the platform. I would think basically it's more slangy than anything else. Don't ask me to define slang. In one of those books, I've done it. It takes at least 40 pages, and nobody agrees with it. So, but that's been around for hundreds of years. And if you begin to look in a slang dictionary, you'll find, oh, well, this isn't new. I thought slang was supposed to be new and unique and always changing. Much slang is part of that core language that everybody knows. And it's simply a question of where you're going to use it, not that it shouldn't be documented. Major reason for having three major reasons for dictionaries is try to find out what spelling is like so you can spell it well enough when you write it that everybody else can understand it. I mean, that's quite clear. What does it mean, obviously? Do people need to know what it means, which is basically the idea, is it used frequently enough that somebody's going to have to figure out what it means, or that we want to make sure that everybody is using it in the same way? And there's a third reason, I forgot what that is already, but that it's there, it's just a factor of age that
I understand
I'll think
that.
about it in a minute.
Yeah. I'm interested in the purpose or the use of all of these dictionaries of slang and idioms and so on. Do authors use them as handbooks? Is it kind of like a thesaurus? Or
I think
what
that,
purpose do they use?
The dictionaries that I've done were done primarily for English as a second language. They were done for people who must have that information and must have all of it. Unlike a standard desk dictionary, which may sit on a shelf or a desk even, waiting for somebody to think, here's a word, I don't know what it means, I'll call my brother-in-law or something like that, and the last thought would be, I'll look it up in the dictionary. And that's there, and it's set up for those people who already know most of the language except the word they're looking up. In an ESL, or English as a second language dictionary, you can't assume that the reader knows anything in particular. They have to be rather simplified. You have to use a defining vocabulary that you think that everybody might know pretty well, but then just in case they don't, you define it again synonymously, and then maybe again, and then you give an example, and then another example.
With cross-references.
With cross-references, and hope for the best. So it's a different kind of approach. And when it comes to something like idioms and slang, these are sometimes sort of salted or peppered into a regular ESL dictionary, but as I say, there are thousands of them. And these are things that people really want. You can't live in a modern society with a modern literate language without knowing hundreds and thousands of idioms. That is, the particular phrases or compounds that have word-like meaning for the phrase, or word-like meaning for the compound.
How did you research or what were your sources for the idioms and slang in different areas?
You begin to look at what's been done in the past and finding fault with it. I mean, that's the essence of the skeptics. I call myself a skeptic. All scholars are skeptic. All scientists are skeptics until their answers are settled. The matter's not settled.
That's the reason it's called research.
Yes, it's called research because we don't know. You begin to look at what's been done before. My brain is filled with hundreds and thousands of these things. But what I was looking at was taking my knowledge, what's been done before, other things that people can think of. If you can imagine, for decades, my wife and I reading the paper in the morning, and she'd say, here's one, here's one, and it's wherever you can get them. That leads to more idioms, and then you begin to look at them and see what the basic form is. And if I've contributed anything to this stuff, and it's great in lexicography, because anything that you contribute is going to be plagiarized by somebody else within a small number of years, is trying to find out what the base form of an idiom is. That is, what are the replaceable elements? If you say, I kicked the bucket, but you can't say, he kicked the pail, that's a joke. It's got to be those words. But in other idioms, there are certain words in it that can be exchanged with a whole list of words. And I'm sorry I can't come up with an example, but some idioms are really fixed, others have lots of variation. Making a dictionary entry that shows what the variation can be, whether you're dealing with people or things, or both people and things, whether or not the tense can vary and all of that, that to me seems like a very essential part of an idiom, to explain to somebody how to use it or how not to use it, whereas just listing a couple of keywords in it won't do the job. So my task was essentially to create to find out what the basic forms of these, and a lot of it is simply asking native speakers, does this sound right? Does this sound right? Sounds right to me. This sounds wrong. Doesn't it sound wrong? And I'm really sure of the answer, but I want.
Now you're talking about foreign languages?
No, no, I'm talking about
still,
English.
Still
Yeah,
talking about English.
talking about English, because all of my work is done. All of my dictionaries, almost all of them are in English.
There's one in Russian.
Those are translations, and in some instances, there's a lot of translations. I think, you know, sometimes I looked myself up on the internet to see how many books are listed, and I found a place that had 341 titles. That includes the translations, the semi-bilingual translations, licensed editions, and things like that. It doesn't include the electronic editions, which are just all over the place now. I can download almost any of my current books for free online from foreign countries. I won't tell you how to do that. But once they're electronic, they're lost for all practical purposes. But these things tend to snowball. The book gets translated, somebody sees the translation, and then they may even pirate it, translate it, and then have the gall to send it back to the Library of Congress to get it copyright, get a copyright from the Library of Congress. So now I forgot the question. I hope you remember.
I don't remember either. Now, you've been editor of several dictionaries.
Right. An editor, a compiler,
capacity.
a writer, they're almost all the same. All of them, I think there are two of them that I got former students to work on that they really did most of the work, and then I put it into healthy form. But then there's the chief editor, the large book, which I'm sure you didn't carry because it's about that thick and it weighs a lot, and the hardbound version of it is very dangerous if you drop it and a corner strikes your toe. There was quite a large staff on that, so I was the editor-in-chief of that. But it still means going through all of the stuff and telling other people what to do and hoping they do it, and then checking up on them to see that they didn't, and then having a little talk and things like that.
Are you currently working on anything?
Yes.
It's very hard to leave that sort of thing.
Yes, it is. It chases you down. The delightful thing about it is it's become sort of a perpetual motion machine. Every now and then I look out on the doorstep and there's a box of books, and gosh, it's from someplace I don't know, and it's another version of a book that I wrote translated into Korean or Japanese or something like that I didn't know existed, so I'm always happy to have those. But other books have to have new editions and things added to them or refocused, and I'm working on a new version of Common American Phrases now, which I think will be the third edition on that. I'm up to many things. I'm up to 4 editions on, which is very nice to see that something you started lived on, that people are they still find it useful and they still buy it. And I don't get a lot of money. I don't get any money out of many of these because I was working as a staff lexicographer for a publisher. But lately I'm taking on new contracts for revisions of them. It's very nice. And not too many days ago, I got a check, an annual royalty check on the first book that I ever wrote, and it was published 30 years ago. And I figure, you know, that's pretty good. I must be doing something.
How did that
right.
happen?
I don't know. It's. I guess there are 4 editions of it.
Which publisher was that?
Jonathan David, very small publisher in New York.
And I always ask the authors that we interview, how do you select your publisher, or do they select you?
For me, it was fairly easy once I got going, because at the time I was doing ESL dictionaries, there was only really one publisher in the country that was interested in doing it, and that publisher was located in Lincolnwood, Illinois, and was constantly offering me a job to come and do these things in-house. And finally, I agreed to do that. So that sort of locked me into most of the ESL stuff. I think Northwestern University Press has one, but for the most part, they're all through either NTC or Contemporary Books, which had bought NTC, or McGraw-Hill, which was the last, my last employer and the last one to put the imprint on.
NTC is National Textbook Company?
Yes, NTC, National Textbook, was bought by Tribune Education, which was then bought by McGraw-Hill. So these publishers tend to be gobbled up, as they always have been, into a larger, I won't give them a name.
Were any of these publications, any of these books used as a textbook in the courses that you offered?
No, actually. No, I was very pleased, though, that my grandson in college called me up and said, "Hey, Grandpa, they're using one of your books as a textbook in my course, and the professor says he likes it a lot." And I said, "Oh, well, that's wonderful." Next thing, "Do you have a copy around that I could have for free?"
Oh.
No, I've never used one.
Oh, I see. And you mentioned earlier that German was your original major for your undergraduate work. Have you done any of these types of books in German?
No, I don't know enough German by any means to undertake this kind of thing there.
Well, this has been a very, very enlightening conversation. Thank you so much for being with us, Richard. We appreciate the interview.
My pleasure.
And thank you for watching Off the Shelf Conversations with Authors. I'm Martha Kofod.